Good morning. My name is Dave Brown, and I'm here to offer a presentation in support of my candidacy for the role of Director of the ITC. My agenda today is going to be to discuss first of all the two topics in order that you requested, and I'll be concluding with a brief summary. First topic, number one, define the approach you would use to develop the portfolio of web-based training products for ITC, and review the most recent release and offer comments on course structure and delivery. My approach to this topic was to reverse these two and move from the specific to the general. This worked better for me, especially since my recommendations for the single course are going to speak directly to the way I would approach developing an entire portfolio. In reviewing the course, I came up with three lists: strengths, challenges, and recommendations. Let's first discuss the strengths. The content was extremely mature, and the structure was well organized and transparent to the learner. In terms of writing, the punctuation, grammar, and syntax were all excellent. And obviously, a web-based course is, by its very nature, self-paced, but it's very important also to ensure that the level is appropriate for the intended audience. And finally, the animations and simulations were very well executed. Not having used one of these cameras myself, I appreciated the opportunity to be able to press a few buttons, even if only on the screen. Areas for improvement included the fact that I was able to identify only one learning objective that was presented to me at the beginning as a learner. We'll talk more about the importance of learning objectives later. In terms of the presentation, I didn't take the time to specifically catalog every style and formatting item, but suffice it to say, while the content was excellent, I felt that the appearance of the course did not do justice to the quality, integrity, and the reputation of the ITC. In terms of interface and navigation, I'm going to address those topics by taking the liberty of paraphrasing an old adage: a screenshot is worth 1,000 words. Let's assume that I've just finished this screen in the course, and I'm wondering where to click next. On some of the slides, I noticed a direction to click next to continue, but I was at a loss as to find out exactly where next was. It wasn't referenced anywhere on the page. As a matter of fact, when I had to guess what to click on next, I found a total of 7 different possible logical places to bring me to the next slide. Granted, on this particular slide, there was a specific instruction telling me one of 2 places I could click on, but this was the only slide on which I had that benefit. On another slide, I was directed to click on a link at the lower left, but I was never told what it's a link for. Is it for the detailed operation guide, or is it for the digital library in which that guide exists? I was never able to find out because when I looked, I couldn't find any link in the lower left to click on. Now, these may seem like small things, but when I'm asking a customer to pay me for the privilege of taking my training, it's important, it's critical, as a matter of fact, to ensure that that process is as painless and intuitive as possible. Here's another case of some navigation issues. This slide has a few different navigation options, and it's possible that some of these options would bring me to the same place, in the place that I intended to go. But when we want our learner to progress from one slide to the next in a specific sequence, having more options is not necessarily better. I contend that one clear choice would be sufficient. So we've beaten the navigation issue to death. The element that really jumped out at me on this slide was the graphic. Let's face it, folks, clip art is dead and should have been put to rest years ago. We're going to talk in our next section on recommendations about some possible alternatives to clip art. So let's address recommendations. In this section, I'll address a few challenges that we've identified, and on a more general level, address the question of my approach to the development of an entire portfolio. We're going to be talking about adult learning theories, tools, compliance, and accreditation. First of all, whether you call them learning objectives, behavioral objectives, or performance objectives, educators have recognized since the early 1960s their importance. More recent research has shown that in order to be effective, these objectives must be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. And finally, in order to be most effective, we want those objectives to be presented to the learner up front before the content is delivered. We've all heard about adult learning theory and people who learn most efficiently by seeing or hearing content, but in my own experience, learners learn best by actually doing. I already mentioned that this course does a good job of incorporating a number of hands-on simulations. I only mention it here again because I feel that it's critical to include as much of that as possible. Training should be engaging. Having owned a dog myself, who I often suspected of jumping up on the couch when I wasn't in the room, I especially enjoyed the Red Fred scenario. And that's an image from this training that I'll probably remember longer than any other. Making the training personally engaging will improve retention significantly. Scenario-based training will bring it to life for the learners. For example, Joe had budgeted $3,000 for the insulation on his home renovation project, but he ended up having to spend only $1,000. Let's learn the story of how Joe was able to save the rest. And when possible, we can extend that scenario to provide a theme throughout the entire training. In this instance, for instance, we could say, this is how Joe focused his camera, this is how he thermally tuned it, and this is how he set the parameters. Tell a story. That way they'll remember it longer. The style of our course must reflect the quality, integrity, and reputation of the ITC program, and the navigation must be intuitive. Selecting the appropriate authoring tool will ensure, will at least address these issues. Likewise, paying a small fee for the license to use a professional image library will help reflect the high standards of the ITC much better than, say, clip art. Determining how best to deploy e-learning comes with a host of considerations: the audience, the budget, the resources, the available technology. All of the options we have with regard to deploying e-learning come with their own advantages and drawbacks. So it's important for us to exercise due diligence in determining the best way to go forward. And finally, using a learning object approach will ensure that our content is reusable, which offers us three advantages. Number one, it will allow us to retool that content to use it in different formats and media. Number two, it will allow us to repurpose the content so that we can use it in addition to training in other areas of our business, such as marketing or support. And number three, it will allow us to simplify the process of internationalizing our training, which is especially important for a company like ours with a global reach. Almost all e-learning these days is compliant with SCORM and AICC standards. It's important for us to have content that will play nicely with other e-learning content and systems. This will also ensure that we will be able to develop partnerships with other e-learning providers, potential customers, and resellers in the e-learning space. 508 compliance is not mandatory, but it will ensure